Next witness is Douglas Murray, who's an author and Associate Director of the Henry Jackson Society, which is a Cambridge think tank, non-partisan but broadly in favour of Western influence and intervention. Douglas Murray, why is it right for us to have nuclear weapons and the Iranians not?
Well, the first reason is fairly obviously that the British government does not seek to retain a nuclear capability in order to wipe out other nations. It hasn't stated that it desires it, and I don't believe it would use it for such an end. It is a deterrent in our case. The government of Iran is not the government of Britain. It is not run by anything like the government of Britain. It's a revolutionary government which sponsors terrorism across the Middle East and around the world. It says it wants to wipe UN member states from the map and does currently what it can to destabilise the region which it's in. I think that's a very different setup.
Matthew Tanner, your witness.
Would a world without nuclear weapons be better than a world with nuclear weapons?
Oh, absolutely.
So, if that's the case, how do we begin the process of moving to a world without nuclear weapons? And is the proposal to spend £25 billion in updating Trident a good first step towards a non-nuclear world, do you think?
Well, I'm afraid the fact is, as one of the main people on the Manhattan Project said many years ago, you can't unlearn things. You can't unlearn the discovery of nuclear technology. And the fact is that many people around the world now know how you make a nuclear bomb. And that knowledge will never be unlearned, sadly. Once the genie is out of the bottle, that's where it'll stay. So the job now, it seems to me at any rate, is for the international community and countries like this one to ensure that as few countries as possible have nuclear weaponry. It is such a terrible thing that we would want to limit it and not allow nuclear technology to be extended. And you see, this is the real problem about Iran, if I can say so, which is that other than its terrible statements and desires against the UN member state, Israel, we know already that the consequence of Iran going nuclear is that every other major power, and indeed some of the minor powers in the region, will themselves follow on and go nuclear. That is such a terrible...
None of us are in favour of Iran getting nuclear weapons, but it seems to me that part of what is necessary for us to have a peaceful world is a sense, globally as far as possible, that the international order has some kind of moral basis. Now, it seems to me that the only moral basis really that we can provide for why it is some countries have nuclear weapons and others don't is that those countries just happen to come out of World War II in a strong position. I mean, it is the fact that we got them first a sufficient basis for moral authority.
No, not at all. But as I say, I would assume you would want to start from the premise that as few countries as possible would be allowed to have this weaponry. If Iran goes nuclear, the whole of the Middle East goes nuclear.
I understand that. I do understand that. But you're saying that there's a moral distinction, which means that we should be allowed to have them.
Yes,
and that other
I think
places,
there is.
But more than that, it seems to me that you're arguing that is something which is kind of, it's fixed. It's not just a quality of the present regime. So let me put this hypothetical question to you. Why would, for example, an extremely right-wing Republican president who believed that the world was created in 7 days and believe in the rapture be less dangerous as a possessor of nuclear weapons than a reasonably moderate Iranian president?
Well, for one thing, in American politics, fortunately, religion is separate from the state. You are not allowed.
Increasingly not so. I mean,
that may be your
Tea Party movement.
That may be. Well, the Tea Party movement aren't coming to power in America.
But let's not talk about the
Well, hang on. You keep on putting hypotheticals to me.
Americans are intrinsically less dangerous than Iranians.
No, and you've got to stop putting hypotheticals to me and not allowing me to answer them. America, as a state, has a very clear, since its founding, has a very clear separation between religion and the state. In Iran, religion is the state. It has been since 1979. And the particular people who have that great country in their grip and have done for more than 3 decades now cannot be sanely equated with the democratic process that goes on continuously in the US. And there is every difference in the world between even your dreaded Tea Partiers and Khamenei, who says that he would like to annihilate a people.
Michael Puttingham.
Is it not inconceivable now that the United Kingdom could ever use its nuclear deterrent independently? The Americans would never give us permission to nuke Iran or anybody else. And so don't we just keep it now for reasons of prestige? And doesn't that send the worst possible message to the world that if you want to have prestige, you should have nuclear weapons?
Well, I mean, there's certainly a lot to be said for the argument that since his country spends almost nothing seriously on defence anymore, it holds on to nuclear weaponry in order to look like it's still a serious power. Yes. And undoubtedly, one of the things around the world is that countries often think they can, as it were, become very serious major powers if they become nuclear. The fact that in most cases the countries that seek to do that, like Pakistan, have unbelievable levels of poverty which their people live in whilst holding these weapons, passes them by. But yes, there is indeed a presumption around the world that it makes you a serious player.
But you know, the debate we're having, to the extent that we are, about nuclear weapons in this country, it's very, very clear that Britain is not willing to give up. So that is sending a very strong message, isn't it? Prestige and nuclear weapons go together.
I think that the very worst lesson that you could have would be if countries like this one decided that in our dream for a less nuclear world, we headed towards a situation where we disarmed, and did so at the very moment that regimes like that in Iran, like that in Saudi Arabia, like that in Egypt, had deals on the table to buy, in the case of Egypt, in the case of Saudi, buy nukes off the shelf, so that when Iran declares its nuclear capability, every single other country in the region declares its nuclear capability. I think that would be the very worst situation of all, where you saw you had decent democratic powers like this one disarmed, and you had the most indecent, undemocratic powers in the world heavily armed to the teeth. That would be a recipe for global disaster.
I disagreed with you at the beginning when you said that the world would be better without nuclear weapons. I happen to believe that it would be worse without nuclear weapons, because I think mutually assured destruction between nuclear powers keeps the peace. I want the United States to have it. But you've already told me that the British only have their nuclear weapons for prestige. So why would it not be a good thing if we tried setting an example of showing that we're willing to give up nuclear weapons, which, because nobody believes we're going to use them, are not in any way a deterrent?
Oh, alas, if only I had your faith in the Iranian revolutionary government following our decent examples. There is no evidence that the mullahs in Tehran since 1979 have followed any decent thing that we have tried to do in this country. They have not had, for instance, the decency of obliging the electorate.
It wasn't exactly my point.
Obliging the electorate.
It just seems pointless.
But you're saying that, as it were, we could lead by example. My point is that, however good an example we gave, we have the great example of elections. The Iranians don't have elections where they bother to count votes. We in this country don't gun people down on the streets. The Iranian government doesn't follow us in that either.
Douglas Murray, thank you very much.